Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for joining us for today's live Q&A for Little Fish. Before we dive into the conversation, I just want to let you know how the evening is going to go. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a box that says Q&A. So if you have any questions for Chad at any point throughout the evening, you can go ahead and type them in there, and we'll jump to a lot of them at the end, but we might also jump to one or two during the conversation as well. There's also a chat box at the bottom. So if you want to have conversation with each other throughout the evening, please feel free to have whatever discourse you like about the movie, about the conversation that we're having. Hello, Millie from New York. I see it already kicking off. And with that, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the director, Chad Hartigan.
Hello.
Hi, how are you doing this evening?
Good. Thanks for having
Good.
me.
Of course. The first thing that I
Sorry,
wanted to talk
I haven't had a haircut in 1 year.
I just had my first haircut in the last year, the other week. So that's the only reason that I don't look disheveled this week. The first thing that I wanted to start talking about a little bit is that, this is the first project that you've directed that you hadn't written. And after you made Morris from America, you started getting certain scripts coming your way and read a bunch of things that just didn't necessarily jump out as something that you wanted to invest the amount of time that it takes to direct a film. And so when you first read the draft for this script, what were the elements that you just started even seeing in your mind visually and creatively of how this film could look on screen and what you could really bring to this project?
I Good question. I think the first stuff that really just popped out to me were some of the smaller moments, and it wasn't necessarily the big ideas of how the memories would play on screen. In fact, that was some more challenging stuff that I left till late, but it was so clear to see that this was a real couple, and their fight and their tender moments were real, and it felt like a movie that ordinarily would have a much smaller scale and much smaller budget because it was so focused on intimacy and relationships. And yet there was this exciting other element of some world building and some scope and some, at that time, science fiction, which is not so science fiction-y anymore. But I do remember just thinking that moment to moment in those little scenes that it really felt genuine, and that it would be a real joy to work with two great actors to bring those scenes to life.
There's also something that you shared a lot of honesty about that I really appreciated when I heard you talking about it, in that in directing something that you hadn't written, you didn't have the fallback of being the person that knew the material more than anybody else. So how did you kind of for yourself just mentally overcome that and really work in a completely different way with the material to ultimately become the person that knew it more than anybody else by the time you went into filming?
Well, it started with just conversations with Mattson. Mattson is the writer, Mattson Tomlin, and it was very clear that he was a generous writer and person, and was going to be generous with the material, and was open to both suggestions or even me just sort of taking over and adding things on my own. And in the end, we did a little bit of both. I gave him some notes and he did them, and then um, at a certain point, I just kind of took over. And then when I was working with Jack and Olivia in the lead up to the shoot, getting their input, we changed it even more. And so he was just really great about not being precious and letting me take over. And it was just tricky for me because the period of having to make decisions began before I felt like I was really the expert. And it was through the process of starting to make those decisions that I eventually felt like I got there. So that was like the biggest learning curve for me was, sort of on the fly, becoming the master of the material.
And when Mattson wrote the script, he wrote it with Olivia Cook in mind. What was the gift that that gave you as a director? Because it's a part that was already written with her skill set, what she brings as a performer, the unique aspects that she was going to bring as an actor to this character.
That all those things, she obviously was very prepared, and she came in and I imagine probably a complete and total pro on every set, but it felt like just, she just knew the material inside and out, and could do multiple takes and bring the exact right emotion. But but more importantly, just the investment. She really, really loved this movie and loved this script, and wanted to tell this story as passionately as anybody else, and that's invaluable if your actors feel that way. I wish, and I hope, and I try to cultivate everybody on the set feeling that way. I mean, it's hard to get the boom operator to feel that way, but I try. And at the very least, I just want them to feel like they're not coming and just doing their job and going home at the end of the day. It really behooves the movie if everybody feels like they want to make it, and they want to make it great. So her being invested from the beginning was a great gift.
And you've mentioned how Jack really brought some additional depth and elements to the character of Jude and complexities. What were some of those aspects that he really found within that character, or developed further from what the scripts were giving him?
In the scripts, it was just sort of gently alluded to that he used to hang out with Ben and Sam touring and take pictures for them and help them record, and that maybe they got a little too wild, and so they moved to Seattle to settle down. And that was really kind of it. And Jack sort of latched onto that and was like, well, that's really, I mean, that's not nothing. Is he like completely sober now, or does he have a drink every once in a while? Like, that's an important distinction I want to, first of all, decide on. And then when we decided on he is sober, then that sort of, he was like, okay, well, I want to dive into that aspect of this guy. And it ended up playing quite a big part in the story. We kind of reworked a lot of the elements of the plot to fit in with that character choice. And that was done pretty quickly because we were getting close to production, but it's sort of the same process that I imagine Mattson did when he initially wrote Emma for Olivia. He had the luxury of thinking about her, and we did the same thing with Jack, just in a much quicker timeline.
Yeah. And with the fact that he is taking photos, I know that you really added a lot of elements of that through your own personal joy of always carrying a camera and really thinking about the way that photographs influence memory so much. And you really can look at something that you've forgotten and suddenly have a visceral recollection of it. What do you feel are the ways in which that really enhanced the story and enhanced this character for you?
It's maybe obvious. I think some people could probably watch it and be like, that's a little too on the nose that he's a photographer. But one of the things I really tried to do is be open to things that maybe are a bit obvious, but it deepened the connection between his memory loss and his character. And so part of you might have been like, oh, if it's obvious, then maybe we should go with something more subtle. But then if you are going with something more subtle, and then as a result, not getting something that actually deepens the crisis for the character, then that's maybe not a good trade-off. So in this particular movie, where I knew that the emotions needed to be really deep and really strong, I really wanted to free myself from sort of intellectualizing some things and just going with my gut more. And it feels like this is going to add emotional depth, then let's go for it. Let's not worry.
It's also so fascinating when you're exploring the concept of memory, because two people, and you really explore this well throughout the film, can have exactly the same experience and remember elements and aspects of something completely different, what someone said, what they were wearing, what they looked like, what happened. And so what are some of the ways that you really wanted to play around with moments where he still remembers something, but they still have a different memory of how it all happened, and how that kind of enhanced some of the conversations and moments between the two of them, of their memories?
Well, we kind of had a running joke on set where anytime the script supervisor came up to us and said something was a little bit off or different, it'd be like, well, it's just like maybe the memories are messing up. It's a continuity proof movie. Can't be wrong. So that's like a joke answer, but we did sort of just embrace the concept that things can, well, there could be some room for mistakes and accidents, and embracing things that might go not as planned. But yeah, generally, like, the approach was to just try and find interesting and unique ways of showing the memory loss without being too extravagant. Wanted to shy away from having it really take over the scenes in the story, and I'd rather, you know, you not notice the techniques. Ideally, I mean, I always want to be. I think a good director should always be doing something with the scene in how he's shooting it, but ideally, you don't really notice that he's doing something. Just kind of washes over you. So like sometimes I think it maybe teeters into being a little showy, but overall we tried to keep it so like the heart of the scene was always the characters and not the visuals, while still having like, you know, effectively telling the story, which is visual based.
Well, to that point, I thought it was really interesting that in the moment where they're talking about their wedding and he's trying to remember the details, that felt like the one moment where you really did kind of use the camera and post-production elements visually to bring us into his mind for a moment and give us his perspective, when at first we don't see Olivia's face. And then even when you shoot the rest of the scenes, there's a little bit of soft focus just teetering around the edge of the frame. Why did you specifically decide that in that one scene that you were going to lean into those moments, but that you didn't want to use it at any other point throughout the film?
Probably just because that particular sequence is so pointed. She's grilling him pretty hard, and it just felt like this would be the time to sort of represent the difficulty of it. You know, there's like one instance earlier where she's like, what time of year was it? And he says summer, and then second guesses that it was winter. And we illustrated that, but that's like sort of a gentle example. And then this was her really being like, she just came down from the roof. He's not in the trials anymore. She's like, oh, it's entirely up to them now. They have no chance of getting outside help, and so it's all business. And yeah, it felt like you sort of just needed to ratchet it up there a little bit.
You also did some research, but not very much, into diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia, but very intentionally didn't want to take a lot of those details into the film. So with that in mind, and looking at the way that memory loss functions in those spaces, how did you want to differentiate the journey of memory loss and the way that Jude experiences it from what we're so used to in life through experiences that most people have with family members and friends who've gone through that?
Well, it's not that I wanted to necessarily differentiate it. It was more just like I wanted to not be influenced, and then, you know, just purely be thinking about it as a fictional disease and a movie, and illustrating visually the concept of the movie, and just be worried about those things. And then, you know, in the end, if it was similar, then that's the way it is, and if it was different, that's the way it is. But just like either way, be unshackled from real life, because I think I felt that if we got too bogged down in trying to have it be a direct parallel or a direct difference, then maybe you would be leaving some things off the table that would actually make the story and the filmmaking better. So just wanted to worry about those things.
And before you were filming, you only had about 4 or 5 days for rehearsal time with Jack and with Olivia. And so within that, it sounds like you didn't really focus on rehearsing the scenes, but it was very much about conversations about character backstory. What were some of the conversations that were really vital for you as a director to want to focus in on, to make sure that when they went into performing their first scenes, that history already existed for the two of them?
Yeah, it was, well, I mean, there was probably one full day, maybe 2 full days, just trying to get the timeline right, because it's confusing. And for an actor, you know, you're already shooting a movie out of order. And so there's a certain amount of, you know, mental dexterity they already need to film the movie out of sequence. And so for them to do that, but also, you know, the script is out of sequence, we just really needed to get in there and be like, all right, this is when you got married. This scene is before you got married, that you just moved in. So once they understood all that, once we all understood all that, then we could kind of dive in a little bit deeper And it was really great because, like Olivia, Jack came really invested, and I felt like he was approaching it as if he had a lot at stake, getting this role right and doing it well. I don't know, where that came from, but it felt like he was really on. And so we got a lot of good stuff from those conversations. One of them, they both felt like there was the script kind of was a bit too even keel, and they were like, well, there should be a bit more passion in both directions. So like they worked together to really have their fights be a little bit more passionate and like raise their voices at each other and kind of yell and not be afraid to yell at each other like a real couple does. And then at the same time, we added in that scene where she asked him to touch her because we felt like, or they felt like there was a real gap in the script of like physical intimacy. And so it was great. I mean, I just really loved, I'd spent the last couple months thinking about it purely as a director. And then it was nice to just have people who are coming at it purely as actors, and they just naturally have a different focus and a different perspective. And then we just started combining the two and coming up with fun stuff.
And then when you started filming, the first scenes that you had to shoot were all the ones inside of their apartment. So essentially the most intimate ones, the ones where they're having arguments, the ones where they're laying in bed talking with each other before they go to sleep. So how did shooting those scenes first then really just set up the tone and almost make the rest of the scenes a little bit easier to film because you've done the elements with the most depth at the beginning and done all the hard work?
Yeah, that's the only advantage to that, because I was really not pleased with it. I mean, the schedule ends up being what it is on indie movies because of a number of reasons. But ideally, I like to start with something kind of simple and let everybody get on their feet for day one. But yeah, we were in that house and had to start with them. But we still tried to be smart about it. And so the very first scene we shot was their second date, where they are just kind of doing like get to know you chats, and that was helpful because they got to really get to know each other as performers and like see how the scenes were going to bounce off of each other. And it probably took like 2 takes before then they were improvising together, and you could tell that the chemistry was going to be strong, and it was such a relief. So then I think that probably the next thing we shot was her testing him about the wedding. That was like day 2, and they were already pretty comfortable with each other, I think. So yeah, it could have gone a lot worse, but 2 great actors, and it went fine.
They're so phenomenal in it. I was really interested in the fact that you've mentioned that they both stylistically work in different ways, and what the differences were and how they approach things, and then how you found a way to kind of meld that together and bring both of their styles into the way that 3 of you all worked together.
Yeah, I mean, I've had to do that before too on other movies, pretty much all movies. I mean, no 2 actors are really ever alike. And Morris from America, Craig Robinson is of course like a master improviser and hilarious and a total pro. And then Marquise Christmas had never acted before, and he was a kid, and so was barely aware of the concept of how a set should be run. So they were very different, but ended up being pretty complementary. And then Jack and Olivia also ended up being pretty complimentary. Her style was much more polished. I don't know if it's because she has formal training or just because she's done a lot of seasons of TV where they have to go so fast. And Jack was really the type that wanted to like just keep doing it forever. Like if I would let him do 15 takes, he would do it forever because he's always like trying to find something new. And yeah, it just that's the job, is like figuring out everybody's style, and that's like part of the fun part. And maybe I'm lucky and spoiled that I've never had 2 styles that ended in real conflict, but usually they just end up in having like more dynamic scenes and characters that feel really distinct from each other.
You also, at the beginning of every time that you were doing a scene, would give them a few minutes before you started going into the moment of the scene with the camera rolling, just to let them find the rhythm and find the emotion with each other. Was that something that you always intended to do from the offset, or was it something that you realized once you were filming was really, really useful to both of them?
I think I realized it on set. Yeah. We maybe did it by happenstance, because the first thing we shot was that date. And the way that scene starts is it starts at the doorway and he brings her flowers and then she says, come in. And then you cut into the middle of the date. So like in the script, the date is in progress. And anytime you do a scene like that, I will typically do a few lines ahead before you start the scripted scenes, because you want to be able to cut in on the right moment and have it feel like they've already been talking. So because the scene was written that way, we did it, and then it ended up producing such good stuff. And also could tell was really helpful for them that we ended up doing it a lot more, even for scenes that didn't start in the middle of them.
And when you look at the film as a whole, it actually doesn't have as many scenes as other films necessarily always do, but it has all these sequences within every single scene. There might be 20 different moments that we're jumping to within a singular scene. So what was the challenge of that, and really just working with the two of them to find that emotive thread that was going to pull all of them together to really feel succinct once it was on screen edited together?
I mean, like you can imagine, it's like you shoot her asking what color were the walls, and he's looking out the window and he says, I don't remember the walls. And then you cut to him in the line for the bathroom, and we shot that probably 2 weeks later. And we've all just got to remember how we performed it 2 weeks ago, and inevitably in the 2 weeks of material you've shot since, you've like honed some things, and maybe you would shoot that other stuff differently now, but you can't. So you kind of try and find the balance of like, well, we can perform this, a little bit differently than we did last time, and it can still feel the same. It wasn't as hard as I would have thought, and maybe you would think too. It's just like the whole movie, the whole piece, the script and everything has such a strong point of view and has such a strong tone that the actors, I think, could tell that there was a consistency in feeling and mood throughout almost all of the scenes. So there's obviously a bullseye, and then it could be somewhere outside of the bullseye, but it was never like way too far off the target. And then it was just about like kind of honing it in a little bit. And there was once or twice where Jack would get confused and be like, why am I standing here? And I just like couldn't explain it, and be like, you're standing there, and like, don't worry about it. And
You just are.
to his credit, he would be like, okay, I trust you. So
one of the other things that visually I was actually interested in was the locations that you found, and just the architectural design within, their home and the place they end up going to stay for a bit together. Because I just thought not only were they really visually stunning locations, but it also felt like it really added to the story of who these two characters are, and told us a lot about their creativity, the type of space that they really sought out to make a home for themselves.
Thanks. Yeah, it's really important. In every movie, I find locations to be extremely important. And this one had a lot. This one had probably somewhere around 40. And it was really, really tough to find them, because we shot it mostly in Vancouver. And I think at the time we were shooting, there was 41 TV series shooting at the same exact time. And so everyone's competing to get like the good locations, and it's not a matter of just like that building is being used by another shoot, so you can't use it. If that building is being used by another shoot, you can't use anything within like a 5-block radius, because they're like, that's their camp. So it was a really tricky but really important to me, and I really pushed our production team to keep looking and find cinematic locations. It's such like if you can find good locations, it's such a huge it's not free, but like a good location versus a bad location, they usually cost the same, but like the good one is such free production value for the final product and can make the movie seem so much bigger, and the story seems so much bigger if you really can nail it. So it was like a real pain, but in the end, I'm really happy that we put all the effort into finding the diversity of those locations and the cinematic value of all those locations.
And even though you were shooting there, obviously the film takes place in Seattle, and we've had a handful of questions about Seattle within the film and just the connective thread, and what were the ways in which you really wanted to capture details of Seattle and how that specifically lent itself to the story, even though you were filming the majority of it in Vancouver.
Yeah, we did film some in Seattle. But truthfully, I had not spent a lot of time in Seattle myself. And so when I knew I was going to be making the movie, I quickly went up there and tried to absorb a bit more Seattle. But I was never going to be an expert on it. And so, and also we weren't going to be shooting a big chunk of the movie there. So instead decided to focus more on a feeling, a mood to the locations, and not worry so much about like this looks exactly like Seattle, so it'll be fine. I didn't want to limit myself to something that could potentially be like, if it was better for the movie, better for the emotions, better for the story, then let's go for it, even if it's like technically not like Seattle. And then when we did go to Seattle to shoot, I wanted to avoid, just being like egregious and being like, well, let's just point it at the Space Needle so everyone knows where we're here, or let's get all the Seattle landmarks in there real fast so that we can really sell it. It just kept to the notion of like, what's the mood, what's the overall vibe, and are we finding good places that just set the appropriate scene.
Mm-hmm. And then we have another question that's come in about, what did you struggle with the most in the editing room during the post-production phase? Because, this is a film that could be told one of 100 ways. And so did you find yourself piecing together the narrative in different orders and really playing around with where scene placement was going to go to work out the different emotional structures that you could create?
Yes, we did. And the final product is pretty different from the script in terms of where the scenes come. And we also ended up doing like a little bit of rewriting even in editing. We had the luxury of her voiceover being sort of a tool, and we figured out kind of late in the game that the trials that he was going under for, that thread was kind of like a little bit underdeveloped, and we had an opportunity to try and amp it up a little bit, and all it really required was us reshooting one scene and then like fudging some voiceover and like changing with a visual effect, we changed the text that he got on the boat to say something new, and then it kind of like flipped the whole trials storyline on its head and made it make much more sense. And as a result, like other things got moved around. It was fun. Like we got in there and we pieced it together, and it's not like it was like it didn't work. It was more a matter of is it working as well as it could? And in fact, if it wasn't working at all, I don't think they would have allowed us to go and reshoot a scene. People don't like the idea of spending a little bit more money if they don't feel like it's worth it. So the fact that it was working really well, but it was just like clear that we could make it this much better. Everybody was on board, and we went out and we reshot the scene, and I'm very thankful because now the movie is 10 times better. I mean, I wish I could be more specific, but you really have had to have seen the earlier versions to know. Trust me.
You put out a DVD version with 10 different releases of 10 different cuts of the film.
Yeah.
We have another question that's about the cinematography and what was the inspiration for the intimate cinematography? Because the way that you play with the camera, you really just pull us right into the center of this experience between the two of them with such intimacy.
Thanks. I work with the same DP in all my movies, and it's a friend of mine from film school. So we've been friends for 20 years now. And really know each other really well. And so from the very beginning are usually on the same page because we have the same taste. And we try to approach the style of every movie from the point of view of the characters. And so with Morris from America, the style of that movie was really energetic and light, and the camera was on Steadicam a lot as if it was floating because you just wanted to feel like a young teenager, like anything was possible in the air. And it was bright and colorful. And with this one, we thought, all right, well, the style of this movie should be intimate and contained and quiet while we're with this couple, and then choose these moments when the outside world sort of forces itself upon them to broaden the scope and change up the style a little bit and add a little more tension or energy or whatever it may be. But generally speaking, the global approach was we're with these characters and we're with their point of view, and this is an intimate story.
Yeah. And we have a couple of people who are asking questions about what were some of the challenges and difficulties that you faced in making this film and how you overcame them.
Well, it's an indie movie, so always time and money. Time and money is number one. And that's luckily this is the biggest movie I've made. Each movie's gotten bigger. So they somewhat feel more luxurious, but also, there's never enough. So it was a constant struggle, and sometimes, like I said, Jack would really feel like he hadn't nailed a scene before we had to move on, and really wanted to push to do it a couple more times. Sometimes I wouldn't be happy with a scene. It's just like we had to move on. So time is always an issue. And there's a car crash in the movie, and I got a little bit of a taste of what making a huge Hollywood movie must be like, where because it was a car crash, they knew it was going to be tough, and they scheduled accordingly. They gave us an entire half of a day just to do this one shot of the car crash. And that was like the greatest thing of all time, because you had all the time to like plan it, set up, make sure it worked perfectly, like shoot it 8 or 9 times. And if I could do that for every scene, not just the stunts. And I think this is what David Fincher does, and like why his movies are so expensive, even though they're dramas essentially, is because he just buys that time to do it and do it and do it until he thinks it's right. So time was always the biggest challenge. And then let me think if I can give a more unique answer, a challenge specific to this movie. I'll think about it. Maybe I'll come back to it.
It's challenging to think of what the challenges were.
Yeah, it was just easy. It was an easy movie. I had a blast. I'm sorry.
The PTSD, you've shut it out of your memory.
Yeah.
I also, with a couple of the scenes that
were
a little bit.
I know it.
Oh,
I know what it is.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get in trouble for even forgetting. My girlfriend was pregnant, and she was due during our shoot. She was due to give birth during our second week of shooting. And so we had to try and time and her delivery to me being home for the weekend. So on Friday night we were shooting, and we wrapped at 2 a.m. Went home, got like 2 hours of sleep, and then took the Saturday 6 a.m. flight from Vancouver back to LA. And she gave birth at 1 p.m. Saturday. And then I stayed with her that weekend, and then had to fly back and shoot again, and then came back for the next weekend. So by far the biggest challenge on this specific movie was having to go back and forth and being a brand new dad and basically getting no sleep ever.
Wow, that's impressive, and kudos to her for holding down the fort while you were finishing the film as well.
Yeah.
I also wanted to talk a little bit about the way in which, it is so centrally told through these two characters and their experience. And there's moments where you hearken to what's going on in the wider world. There's the moment where when they're on the boat, and suddenly that crowd smushes into her. But the moment that Jude's with her, you bring these two characters away and you put the camera just on the two of them, and we never go back to the rest of the group. Or that moment where we see a crowd trying to bang down a glass door, but you really just sit on it for a second. How did you make choices about where you specifically wanted to show the wider concept of what's going on with NIA and the world, but really at the same time never stepping into it for very long and always bringing it very quickly back to the two of them?
Well, Mattson did it first, and he did a good job with it in the script. But then we found in editing that actually we had shot more NIA than we needed. The first couple of test screenings, and it's always very helpful for me to screen cuts for friends. I have a lot of filmmaker friends and peers that I really trust, and so we'll screen it like every 2 weeks once we start getting in a groove. And it was pretty clear, like the very first feedback we got was there's too much of that stuff. And so the key was just to, be open to listening. And we ended up taking a little bit of it out, making sure, like it really sort of made us double down and focus on, hey, if they're not experiencing it themselves, do we really need it? Do we really need to know it if it's not directly affecting them? And there, in the end, really was like only one or two very small instances where we felt like, all right, this is important to know. Let's put it in, but otherwise, let's stay close to Emma and Jude.
And in a more intimate way of us seeing what's going on in the wider concept, we see their friends who are going through it, where he's experiencing memory loss and, the damage that it's doing to their relationship. And it preempts this journey, that Jude is on with losing his memory. And I thought that was an interesting parallel, where you've got these parallels, but they're not taking place at the same time. Were you intentionally creating a really gentle sense of foreboding nature through the way that you were jumping back and forth between those two stories?
Yes, and that's one of the things that I did contribute to the script once I came on. One of the first things I did with Mattson was work on Ben and Samantha's story, because I think in his original version, they stayed together, and I thought it would be better if they didn't make it. Just, for dramatically to have a juxtaposition to our characters, and also just, I really, when I first read it, was wondering, I was like, okay, well, if this is a global pandemic happening to everyone in the world, why are we watching a movie about these two people in particular? And part of that answer is that, the point is you're just supposed to pick any two random people, and like that's what makes it poignant and relatable and smart. So that's part of the answer. But then the other part of the answer has to be that their love is so strong and so undeniable that it makes it worth telling this story from their point of view. And so I really felt like we had to show their love to be more powerful than any other of the loves in the movie. And I think that Sam and Ben have a great love, and I love the way that Raul and Soko played those characters. And I didn't want to make it seem like they didn't have a great love. It was like, the point is that they also had a great love, and still it was like too much. NIA was too much. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that was definitely the point, was to be like, this is an example of how things could go, but not for Emma and Jude.
And then we've also had a few people submitting questions asking about, obviously the genesis of the film was a short story before it was turned into a feature script. And as you looked to that source material, what were some of the tiny details that you thought were really important to make sure that they were communicated in through the feature version of this?
I wish I could remember exactly, but I definitely went back once we had a script that we were all really happy with. The last thing I did was go back and reread the short story and make sure like we weren't just missing anything that we wanted to steal. And I did end up, from that last go round, stealing a few lines and making sure Emma said them in her voiceover. I think one of them was I wish I could just look at him and see what went missing, but he looks the same. that was one that I felt really needed to be included. And then the last scene we added, that's like an actual scene in the movie, was them in the woods describing their fake honeymoon in Hawaii. And that's directly from the short story, and I wanted to make sure we included that. That felt really important. And in fact, in my ideal world, I tried to add both that scene, and I wanted to film like what they're talking about, them actually in the water in Hawaii, and play that first as what you like take for at face value was their real honeymoon, and then later reveal that what actually happened is that they just went into the woods and made up this fake honeymoon. We didn't have the budget, unfortunately, to actually shoot the Hawaii version, but it doesn't really matter. Like it was just like a great scene to have them building something false, but like holding on to it as if it was a real memory. I thought that was a really poignant scene and wanted to include it.
And within that, I mean, it feels like throughout the entire film that you're playing with us a little bit in terms of when you give us full information, when you're teasing us, when you're leading us down a certain path, and then you take us somewhere different. Was that intentional, that you really wanted to create a slightly meta experience for the audience where we're almost unsure what memory is by the end of it?
Yes, for sure. Both that, like sort of questioning who's right or who's exactly right, and is anybody exactly right? Definitely, that's like, I'm happy if people think that as they go. But more importantly, I just wanted to really make sure that at the end of it, when it's an experience that you look back on and you're remembering the movie in your mind, that it can sort of play as one long memory or one long thought. And it really never felt like you know, there was a very distinct real and a very distinct fake. It's more just, it all kind of weaved in and out of each other, and now lives on as a memory.
No, it absolutely does that. It's a really, really beautiful film with really stunning performances. So congratulations to, you and everyone else involved in this project. And thank you so much for joining us for this evening's Q&A. And thank you to everybody for jumping in and submitting such wonderful questions. And hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their night.
Thank you for watching the movie and being interested. And I hope I answered questions. You can always bother me on social media if I didn't.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chad.
Thanks.
Bye.